Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Zareth Prevails, a Grand Arena story. Coming in off of the heels of a defeat in my last round, I really needed to win the current matchup. We were in a new group, the start of a new round, and I had a good chance to be able to start making some momentum up and being able to do some good work. I want to avoid spoilers as much as I can, but I just finished my round 8, and I have to say, that's been a really, really intense couple Grand Arena Championship rounds. I really think you guys are going to like the next one. I hope, anyways. Anyways, on to this one. This one is also going to be good. My opponent was really skilled. They had a lot of things going for them. They had better gear than I did by a significant margin, better mods, and we were tied on Zetas, which are probably the three most important overall statistics in this kind of a match. One really interesting dynamic to our match was that my opponent attacked the first row and then stopped, and they only missed 4 total banners. So I had to make up as many banners as I could. I could tell that my opponent was a highly skilled individual, and I really couldn't afford any mistakes at all. My opponent's front line was something I'd come to expect in Grand Arena. Not necessarily that specific composition, but all of those teams are pretty familiar at this point. Being as the goal is always to get more information until we have a complete map of the entire teams that we have to face, we're going to try to conquer one zone at a time just to be able to plan a little bit better. Jedi Training Rey is a great team to use in your first wave of attacks just because she's not really going to be usable against the top tier teams, and she's really great at getting a lot of good banners against teams like First Order or Bounty Hunters where they're not really top tier either. You can kind of think of them as like the mid tier. They're not trash or anything, but they're not really going to be super relevant to the greater scheme of a really close fought Grand Arena match. Our goal is always to preserve as much strength as possible in the front zones. If we can take down any of the teams with an under strength squad or a squad that maybe doesn't perform as well against top tier teams, just like I was saying, the mid tier here, that's always the goal, and Jedi Training Rey is always one of my first considerations for that, just because of how well she does against some matches, and other matches she just really super struggles. For instance, Jedi Training Rey has almost no real value against a team like Jedi Revan or Darth Revan. She's always going to get completely destroyed, at least at this point in the game. I mean, who knows what new crazy stuff's going to happen with the next batch of characters or whatever. I know that Resistance and First Order will be coming up at some point, but as of right now, she takes on the mid-tier teams really well and has almost no value anywhere else. I don't even like to use her against the trash tier teams because of how hard it is for her team to be able to regenerate her, or rather, their protection. I like her against specifically First Order and Bounty Hunters just because you can control both of those teams really well, and that's what our team excels at. One fun discovery recently was that Bossk Bounty Hunters do really well against Old Republic. For some reason, I had never really tried the matchup until recently, but I, of course, did it wrong initially and tried Jango as the leader just because I thought that he'd be able to reduce the number of dots I got, not taking into consideration that Canderous would be able to take on Jango's lead just because he had tenacity down, which apparently bypasses the entire thing. And so I just assumed that bounty hunters were not really a good counter to Old Republic. I'd won my match, but it was a pretty close run thing, and it really wasn't worth the risk. However, someone had mentioned to me that Bossk bounty hunters work really well, and it seemed a little bit crazy to me that I hadn't tried it before, just because I'm a huge proponent of bounty hunters, and I really like the various things that they're able to do, the things they bring to the table. You've heard me preach at length if you've watched many of my videos about how strong bounty hunters are on offense and why I don't really think they're a great idea to leave on defense. And this is just another reason why. They can take a mid-tier team like the Old Republic team and get maximum banners, or at least close to max banners. You can never really tell the very tail end of a fight how it's going to go. You know, if you're able to get everything and then at the last minute your opponent who has high tenacity or they've resisted everything regardless gets one lucky hit in, and then everyone, you know, ends up with a little less total protection and health. In Bossk's case, I really like him getting hit with those last minute hits just because he has it in his kit where he actually heals after he's hit. So alright, so my arbitrary goal in this match was to end up with the exact same or better number of banners than my opponent did after they had destroyed my first row and kind of just walked away, taking a break for a minute. Or maybe it was a strategy to see what I'd do, how I'd respond, to see how much leeway they would be able to have in their final wave of attacks. You kind of want to be able to plan how many banners you can slide just so that you can choose the optimal teams for each matchup. I mean, if I don't have to worry about banners and all I need to do is get a win, sometimes I'll take a totally random, weird team just to get a win. Even though I'm sacrificing banners, I'm still potentially, well, I am going to win that round, theoretically, and, you know, that's the thing that matters the most. But in addition, some teams are going to have a higher risk-reward factor. If you watched my last episode, you'll know that I miscalculated against the Night Sisters, which kind of cost me the match. It looked like a good move, and as I discussed at length in that episode, I don't actually think it was a good move, and you can watch that episode to tell why I thought that, but one result was that I've kind of just decided to use the Padme squad, for now at least, as my Night Sisters counter, just because they do really well against Night Sisters. Night Sisters have things like variable health, especially if someone has Old Daka Zayded. Old Daka can have a huge health pool just after you kill zombie a couple times. And the awesome thing about the Padme squad is that they kind of don't care about that, just because they deal percentage health damage rather than doing actual just the raw damage. I mean, they do that kind of damage too, but if you look at my mods, they really aren't accentuating any kind of damage stat. They're all just trying to max out the health total for all of my guys, just so I'm able to survive a lot of hits. As they take hits, they grow protection up, and you know, if you want to know the mechanics of the squad, of course, you can always go look, but Padme regrows their resilience based on their maximum health, so almost all of the damage that I do with that squad is based on percent health, which is one reason why I'm not prioritizing it in terms of putting Gear 13 on, because a lot of their Gear 13 pieces are actually designed to give extra flat damage, which flat damage is nice, and on most squads, on most characters, that really matters. But the true power in the Padme squad is where they're doing a ton of damage based on percent health rather than actual raw damage. Okay, so I made a kind of interesting decision, in my opinion, in this matchup, to be able to use Jedi Revan here, despite the fact that I didn't know what zone or what things my opponent had in his back zone. I think it's worth a little bit of discussion, to be honest. My opponent's back zone didn't have any squads that I was that afraid of. It had Qi'ra and Rex Wampa, I believe, whereas those teams are actually pretty good on defense in territory, or rather in Grand Arena, they're not necessarily amazing in terms of teams that I need to use. I can really use a lot of different teams. I have a lot of options for that. So the only real teams that I was worried about after I was able to take out Night Sisters were the back two unknown squads in the back. So, of course, the worst case scenario was something like Jedi Revan and Darth Revan, or maybe Gear 13 Grievous and Darth Revan, something like that. And whereas I agree that that would be a very bad situation indeed, having Darth Revan and General Grievous, especially because my Jedi Revan squad is really my only viable counter to the General Grievous Gear 13 squad. But I decided to make kind of a calculated risk here. My opponent had already beat 4 of my zones right away. I had my Geonosians defending it, along with my Gear 13 Grievous, and I think I had, at that point in time, 4 Night Sisters at Gear 13, and whereas none of those squads are necessarily bastions of defense, I mean, the Grievous squad actually does quite a bit of that. But really, none of those squads are easy to take down and get max banners, and my opponent had only missed 4 banners so far. I was relatively certain that they had already burned through either 1 or 2 of the Revans, as well as probably Traya, but I really think that if you're going to get that good of a score against a General Grievous squad, or Night Sisters, or whatever, you're probably going to have to use Darth Revan somewhere. Plus, it's just kind of a bad move to put Darth Revan in the back zone, just because you're allowing your opponent to get nearly full points, and if you can't full clear your opponent yourself, you're really going to struggle. Like, you could lose the entire match, even if you have a really strong Revan team, because you're not denying them 2 zones, you're only denying them 1 zone. Anyways, enough of that talk. I saw that the back zone was sufficiently intimidating, but as I had suspected, there was no Jedi Revan, there was no Darth Revan even, there was General Grievous, and there were the Geonosian squad, which that squad is really strong too. I would need 2 different meta teams to be able to beat it, but I really wasn't that worried. Being able to use General Grievous, or beat General Grievous here with Darth Revan, I mean, it's not a sure thing by any stretch, but it's not that bad. I mean, if you're on offense, you can really control the situation to do a lot of things. My main concern here was in banners. I mean, you can see all my protection values are really bad here, and so you can see me kind of thinking, I mean, I could be destroying this team and finished by now probably, but I was trying to figure out how I could regrow some of that protection before the battle ended, and I eventually came to the conclusion that that probably wasn't going to happen. One thing that probably everyone watching this already knows, but it's probably worth mentioning as well, just in case, but because Darth Malik's protection kind of blends into his health and it becomes one big health pool, if you have full health, well, you get the banner for full health, but in addition, you just automatically get the full protection point. It just doesn't matter if he's almost dead or what, you'll still get that protection point for some reason. And the same principle actually applies to the Nihilist lead team, not that you really see it ever, but if you ever do use Nihilist lead, which there are a few videos that I have using Nihilist lead just because I wanted to max my banners a little more. If you ever do use Nihilist lead, then you get the full protection banners as well. Even if your team's on death's door, you end up getting all of the points for protection for some reason. This Geonosian fight is a pretty interesting one. You can see the Geonosians kind of committing seppuku here just by attacking. They're a really strong squad, but because they get so many assists, Traya seems like the obvious counter for them just because she punishes them every time they make an attack out of turn. She takes down their life, and even though they can't die from that specifically, once you're at 1 health and 1 protection, anything can take you down. I haven't quite figured this squad out, though. I think that what I'm going to end up doing is getting Sith Marauder up and running, just so he can go with my Jedi, or rather Darth Revan team. And then I can put Sith Trooper here. And even though Sith Trooper isn't necessarily going to do an amazing job of keeping them all alive, just because they'll dispel his taunt pretty quick from all of their mass attacks and assists, just because he's there, he'll be able to spread some of that health. You can see, even though I took out the Alpha, which is always the goal against this squad, once you take out the Alpha, you've still got a lot of bugs who can potentially do enough damage to topple you if you're not careful, which honestly I've actually lost to bugs using just Traya and Scion, so I haven't really figured out the exact perfect combo yet. I took Dooku against him recently in the last territory war with Traya, and that was pretty interesting because he stunned them, but I don't know. We'll see. That squad, that matchup is a work in progress. But right now, I'm happy that I have a pretty easy mode counter. I mean, you kind of have to work for it with any other team. I ended up with 56 banners against that bug team, which was really kind of nerve-wracking. Losing 4 banners is not really that awesome, especially because I was under strength by 2. So I actually ended up missing 6 total banners, I think. Anyways, not the most amazing result. And here, I actually thought that maybe I would lose. You can see I thought that Wampa should have been dead by now. I mean, I don't necessarily think I had terrible RNG. I think I just don't have much experience with a couple elements here. First, I always have had CLS and his team, his triumvirate, if you will. I've always just kind of stacked them with or on defense, and so I don't really use them against anything. I thought that by now I would have destroyed Wampa, which now you can see, but in the opening volley, I really thought that he was just going to go down, but instead, Rex did a lot of good work by giving them turn meter, and then their entire team went, and he made his Hermit Yoda really fast, so Hermit Yoda was able to unstun Wampa, send him in for an assist, and really cause some mayhem. So I really did underestimate this team, unfortunately. Even though I use almost the exact same composition on my own Rex team, it still kind of took me by surprise here. And that's just really a testament. I'm not trying to say anything. I'm not trying to make excuses here, but I have to say that it's just important to know what your team is capable of. That's one of the reasons I really like bounty hunters, and even though I miscalculate every once in a while, I end up being able to do quite a bit with them just because I know exactly how to use them, exactly what their limitations are. I can use all their various special abilities to the max, and yeah, they're just a good squad to be able to do that, and most of the squads you want to use in the end are going to be specialized in that way. Commander Luke teams are actually really solid in terms of that stuff as well. So I'm thinking I might try to keep Commander Luke on offense for a little bit just so I can learn the team a little more. I mean, maybe he'll end up going back in the box for defense. I don't really know. You guys should actually chime in. What do you guys use against CLS? I never, ever, ever see him on defense, so I'd be really interested to know what other people use. I know that my own Commander Luke hardly ever gets a defense, and if he does get a defense, it's usually against a guy who doesn't really know how to play, or they're out of teams because General Grievous took him by surprise or whatever. You know, it rarely gets a defense, so I'd be interested. At any rate, here we see the First Order is taking care of business against Qi'ra. Now, this squad is really interesting because they had Visas Marr, which is not something I'd really ever seen. I actually really like Visas Marr in theory. I know that it's kind of cool lately on Reddit to complain about how Visas Marr doesn't have a place, and really I do think she should have a tag of some sort. She's kind of out of place, but the fact that she can provide things like armor piercing and she can revive characters, I mean, that can really add a wrinkle to a lot of different teams. And really my only complaint against this Qi'ra team here is there's no hard hitters at all. The hardest hitter really was probably Visas herself, and no one really looks at her if they want DPS, damage per second. She can't really anchor a whole team. I mean, this team is definitely a timeout team. You would never use it on offense just because you'd never be able to finish off an enemy team within 5 minutes. But this team really, I mean, my First Order is a pretty highly functioning squad, and it took almost 4 minutes to take down this Qi'ra team. So really props to my opponent for finding a really interesting team. 59 banners is pretty good, though. I mean, in the end, whereas it's a solid team, I was fortunate enough to have enough in the tank to beat it without much issue. Almost immediately after I made my attacks, my opponent made their attacks, and it's so nerve-wracking to watch because you just want to stare at the screen and will your teams to win. And luckily for me, I don't know what my opponent did exactly, what team they used, but they lost to my Nest team. That's a pretty common occurrence. If you're a territory war guy, you know that your guild is going to fail all of their attacks against Nest for some reason, even like 7 of their attacks. So it can happen to anyone. It happened to me in a territory war a little bit ago. So my opponent did a really great job. They destroyed all of my teams on the first try except for that Nest, and I got really lucky there. One loss, of course, in this match, if I got a perfect score, or rather I got a win with no fails, that person is going to win. So I did manage to win this one. It was a really close one, though. My opponent was highly skilled, like I said. And I don't say that just because they're going to be watching this video. I told them about it via the game chat. But honestly, I had lost so many banners over the course of the match. I mean, I'd lost 18 total banners, which if I get a full clear with no fails, usually I do much better than that. I'm trying to get over 1910 is kind of the goal every match. But at the end of the day, my opponent actually had a score such that if I had failed one of my attacks, it looks like I might have been able to squeak out the win anyways. And honestly, it's really hard to tell that sort of thing just because you don't know. I mean, maybe my opponent, after they had failed an attack, they just decided to get the full clear, but not really focus on banners, because who really cares at that point? A couple extra points is probably not worth the stress. Anyways, let's wrap it up. Please stay tuned for my next match, which is really interesting. My opponent had a faster Badstilla and faster Darth Revan, and they put him on defense, so it was really challenging. And I had to do quite a bit of prep work just to get to the point that I thought that maybe I would stand a chance against them. So if you're into that sort of thing, which if you're watching this, you probably are, please stay tuned. And otherwise, thank you so much for watching. And remember that in all things, Z'Barriss prevails.